Hello, I'm Cheryl Coleman, a director here at Cablevision Channel 4. For many years, the Etowah Valley Historical Society has been promoting awareness and preservation throughout our county. For this reason, Channel 4 is proud to join with the Historical Society in bringing you Crossroads, an informational series on the history of our county. Join us each week and see for yourself how interesting and exciting discovering Bartow's rich history can be. For more information about the Etowah Valley Historical Society, or if you would like to present ideas on future subjects for Crossroads, write the Society at Post Office Box 1886, Cartersville, Georgia, 30120.
The magnificent Etowah Valley, with its fertile soil, vast forests, and an abundance of minerals, proved a great attraction to the early settlers of this region. When the area opened up for white settlement in the 1830s, many people moved here seeking a new beginning. A few of the early pioneers were quite wealthy, building great homes. Among these stately mansions still in existence are Colonel James Sproul's Valley View, built in 1835, the Benjamin Reynolds home, built in 1846, and Dr. Maxwell Young's Walnut Grove, built in 1840. This episode, however, is not about the wealthy, but about the great majority of settlers who once here struggled daily to provide for themselves and for their families. Life was not easy for these people, mostly farmers, who once here had to clear the land and provide shelter. The most common of these early shelters was the log cabin, a simple structure created from logs taken from the abundance of nearby virgin forest. Most of these early log cabins have long since disappeared. A few, however, remain standing today. Some examples of these are the James Upshaw cabin, built in 1836, the Arville Matthews cabin, built around 1840, and the J.J. Upshaw cabin. Interesting enough, we find the Cherokee Indians, who preceded the early settlers, also built log cabins. Three that come to mind are the original portion of the Cora Harris home in the valley, the H.W. Howard home, and even the nucleus of the structure occupied today by R. Dudley Barton and Son Funeral Home in Adairsville.
I'm Guy Parmenter with the Etowah Valley Historical Society, and welcome to Crossroads. The work that we do in the Society is very rewarding. However, the challenges of preservation are presented daily. One of these challenges began with a phone call to the Society and a request for advice. The problem involved the preservation of one of these early log cabins. The solution is a cooperative effort between the Etowah Valley Historical Society, the Georgia Department of Natural Resources at Red Top Mountain State Park, and Sherlin Vaughn, a former Bartow County resident now residing in Marietta. It was Sherlin Vaughn who made that initial phone call. He is now the generous donor of an 1870s log cabin which will be preserved for future generations. The cabin will be placed along the shore of Lake Altoona at Red Top Mountain Lodge. Work began a few months ago with several meetings held. The most memorable occurred when all phases of the cabin project were discussed in detail. At that meeting were many members of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, including Billy Hanson and Ralph Del Giorno of Red Top Mountain State Park. Also in attendance were David Grabenstetter with the Army Corps of Engineers, Sherlin Vaughn, and Etowah Valley Historical Society members J.B. Tate and myself. Go with us now to the cabin site on Vaughn Road.
I
Billy.
see you now. Yeah.
How you doing?
Sorry I'm running a little late, but I got caught in traffic. How you doing this
Good to
morning?
see you.
Good to see you.
This is Billy Hanson with the Department of Natural Resources at Red Top Mountain. Billy, what's your job up there?
Title over there is site manager. We have about 50 employees over at Red Top with a lodge, restaurant, basically everything that a visitor would need.
Well, you run a good operation.
Well, thank you, sir. We brought the guys over yesterday for a meeting. We had a meeting over here. Went outstanding, like I was telling you before. They're just really excited about coming over and starting the project and getting it before the bad weather starts.
Well, you're a little late this morning. Been out here loading hay. We've already got one wagon loaded in the back and started pulling some more out on the porch.
Well, Mr. Foreman, I apologize for that, but it was good for you, I'm sure.
Don't let that happen again. I'll call you early in the morning. You know, it's exciting to be here looking at an old house like this, and I think the viewers are going to take a look at this in the background and think, what are we doing here? This is a real old typical type farmhouse that you would see on many roads in Bartow County, and but something unique about this house.
Very unique, Guy. This is, I don't think the viewers now can see it, but hopefully as the project goes along and the filming continues, they'll be able to, as the covering is taken off, they'll be able to see the exposed, some of the 16 and 18-inch pine hand-hewn logs in there. A wonderful example of early Georgian farmhouse architecture here. It's basically, I don't know, Guy, you want to do it or you want me to do it, about, tell them what a dog trot is, 2 rooms. It's basically, if you look at it, it's 3 doors, 2 rooms here, and the center, we don't know if it was originally open all the way, and we'll know that when we take the coverings off, but usually on a dog trot like this, it was just a pass-through all the way. The dog trot, call it a dog trot simply because that's where the animals, the dogs or the cats or whatever, the dogs or whatever slept out there. Is that, I think Mr. Vaughn, yeah. Here comes Sherlyn Vaughn. She had a little light on this thing.
Good, good.
Good morning, Billy. Good morning, Sherlyn. How you doing?
Okay, good to see you.
How you doing?
Fine, doing fine.
Glad you come along this morning. Sherlyn is the donor of this house to the Department of Natural Resources, to the people of the state of Georgia. Something I know the Historical Society is very excited about, working on extracting a log cabin out of this old abandoned farmhouse, which has been full of hay recently.
Yeah. Well, I'm anxious to see it, disassembled and reassembled up at Red Top, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I appreciate you calling. I think it was back around March or April. You gave me a call, and you were thinking about maybe possibly selling the property and didn't know what the future of this house would be, and asked for a little help from the Historical Society on finding a home for it. And quite frankly, when I came out here, I brought J.B. Tate with me, and we took a look at it, and I thought Mr. Vaughn was really giving us a real old rundown house. I mean, when you first come up and you see this, I mean, it's really in bad shape. But I was very excited when you go inside and you pull away some of the wallboard and some of the outside paneling, and you really see a great old cabin, and it's going to be a fun project.
Well, that's the reason why I'm anxious to see it, in its original state. I can't remember it anyway except, the logs been covered. Of course, inside certain areas you could see the logs, so I knew the logs were here, and I knew they were large, and it was sort of deteriorating. It was not sort of, it was deteriorating, and all thing it was good it was doing is storing hay, so I'm glad to see this project going. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. When did you acquire the house, or when did you become associated with this house?
Well, our family bought this house in the 40s, back in the early 40s, and we moved here, I don't remember the year, but sometime prior to the end of World War II, and we've lived here in this area ever since then.
Mm-hmm. Where are you living now?
Well, I'm living in Marietta. Okay. And of course, I have brothers that live all over the place. I got a couple of them here I'd like to introduce you to them.
Yeah,
good.
Here they are.
Yeah.
Come on in, Ralph. Herman.
Both of them live in this general area. This is Ralph. He's lived here. He's the older brother next to me.
How you doing, Ralph? Nice to see you again.
Morning.
Herman.
Nice to see you again, sir.
See you too.
So we got a couple, we have 2 more brothers. One lives away from us, and one lives in Cargill. We just lost one recently, this past December, yeah. And I have one sister, so it was a big family. And of course, I was the youngest, and when I was growing up, most of the boys had already, got grown and left, and
We'd already done the work.
yeah. Well, I don't know about all that work they talked about.
Well, was this a family farm? Was there any acreage with
Yeah,
it?
it was a family farm, and my dad bought it from Mr. Keith, who lived down the road here. It was 160 acres. I think that was a normal.
It's tract
size
of land. I believe that's what they
Yeah.
called it back then.
And one thing we used to look forward to in the fall and around Thanksgiving, all the brothers would come in, and we all go rabbit hunting in this area. It's all open. They wouldn't all these houses here at that time. It was wide open. You could hunt rabbits and quail. So that was a treat to look forward to in the fall.
Yeah, we were talking, I asked you there the other day about it. Maybe you could tell the viewers. I asked you, did you have a well? And Ralph said, no, we had a spring. It was across the road over there. Did y'all have to, Mama make you haul water?
Oh, yes, for a good long while. Finally, we got modern, got a pump in it, but for a long time you had to fetch it, had to tote it.
Had to go fetch it.
So
No
that was
matter
one of
how
the
cold it
troubles.
was or what, you had to go get to work.
Okay. What kind of crops did y'all grow with y'all?
Mostly cotton.
Mostly cotton.
Mostly cotton. And some corn. But,
Did you have livestock, just your typical
well, my
Pair of
dad,
mules
he
and cow-
always kept a few cows, yeah.
few cows?
Yeah. There used to be a barn back at the back out there. He'd have at least 3 cows most of the time, and then calves and all.
I wanted to ask you one question because I couldn't quite figure it out when we went through it and looked at it. Was the upstairs ever used when y'all were here? Strictly the downstairs?
Strictly the downstairs, right.
Strictly the downstairs.
When was the house last lived in?
Oh, gosh, I don't remember. How long has it
Oh,
been?
it's been 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Since the family lived
Yeah,
in it.
about 20 years ago, when my daddy died, my sister was living with him then, right before then, and she moved in with Frank, another brother, and they got a house over here about a mile, and they lived together for quite some time, and now she's got where she can't take care of herself. She's in a nursing home.
I think it was 1970. I think it was, so it's a little bit better than 20 years.
Okay.
I was out here in the spring. I noticed just walking around when we started talking about the project. And for the viewers, you can't see it now because it's starting to be the latter part of fall. But in the spring, if you rode down the road, it's just full of old species of daffodil bulbs out here that, bloom in the spring and then go under. And also, one thing that really interested me when I was down the road was, and again, you can't see it, but there's a tremendous, beautiful old cedar here in the front yard, which will helped us date the property. And we thought that, to the best, Mr. Parmenter, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we kind of flipped a coin and figured somewhere around 1870 was basically the dating. And hopefully, as we go through the project, we'll be able to update it, and maybe we can find something that will give us a more true dating somewhere behind the wall or.
I hope a good carpenter carved his the
Put the
dates
date in his name,
the
right?
wood.
Yeah.
But these, as you say, these cedar trees were common to that period. It seems like all the old houses in the county have one of these cedar trees out front that dated about that time. So, and we've done some research at the courthouse, but it's kind of a dead end, and we really can't tie it down. But we're going to do a little more and see what we can come up with.
One of the things that that sort of threw me off is the fireplaces. They're brick. I thought back in the 1800s and all they'd all be rock, but some of the historians tell me they made brick, on site. So possibly they made the brick right here on this site when they built this place.
That's true, and it got me too on this thing. But we went back to Mr. J.B. Tate, who we kind of class as our resident historian, and he gave us a short class on. And like Sherlin says, the bricks were probably handmade here on the property. So, as we know, like I said, we don't have a dating. I was going to say something about that as the project continues, and this is going to be, we'll probably take a 6 to 8 weeks to maintain the integrity and take it down slowly. But hopefully, Sherlin and I are excited about this. You never know, behind the wall or underneath a log or something, you might find something. It's something. So Sherlin, we hope for his sake that there's something back there, a family memento that got misplaced when they were when they were boys growing up or whatever, and it'll be such a nice thing to do to give them for their scrapbooks.
Maybe a bag of gold, too.
Hey, you never know.
That'd be better. That'd be better.
You never know. The house itself, where exactly are you going to put it up at Red Top?
It'll be, we tried to make it as accessible for everyone in the state of Georgia or from out of state to see. We have one nice thing about this particular cabin and this particular piece of historical goods, it will probably be visited by more visitors than any historical piece in the state of Georgia. In the state park, we have about 1.5 million visitors every year come through Red Top, and we have placed and sited the cabin when it's restored back to its originality at the crowning point of the handicapped, what we call the handicapped nature trail, which will be away out behind the lodge there about 200 yards. So not only will children will do living history programs, hopefully in the seasons, like Sherlyn was talking, favorite time was Thanksgiving with the corn husk and the pumpkins. We'll all decorate it, and then Christmas at the cabin, plus also with the handicapped accessibility, and we're going to make sure that we can get our handicapped accessible trail to go on up by the cottage up here so that they will also be able to view it. So it's going to be viewed hopefully by everyone that comes through.
Sounds great.
It sure does. Sound great. I understand you also are going to have all kind of little crops out there like they did years ago, cotton, corn.
That was one of the things, the
garden.
reason I was asking you guys, because we were going to plant some cotton, and we don't know if it'll grow over there because we don't know what kind of soil we really have. We were planning on planting cotton and corn and anything that y'all can remember that you planted.
Potatoes.
Sweet potatoes.
Sweet potatoes. Always sweet potatoes.
We'll have to plant some of them too. And it'll be fenced in the old, we'll probably do it in split rail fence. And that will be right down in front of it. The setting of it, which is really nice, once that sits on a knoll with kind of wooded around it, on the front porch will overlook a little valley and a little plain out there, the crop, and on the back side will always face the sunset of Lake Allatoona. So it couldn't be more pretty. It really couldn't.
About how big is this cabin?
We've measured it off a couple of times, and we get a couple of inches both ways, but it's really, you could say it was 46 feet long by 19 feet wide, and the front porch is 9 foot wide, and when it goes back, it will have a matching porch on the back side, so I think that would make it 46 by 38 when it's completely set in place.
Good size.
Good size cabin.
Now, when the viewers can see the additions on the back, there have been a couple of additions to this cabin. What we're sitting, the front section is only about probably half the floor space of this.
Correct.
Were any of the additions added on while y'all were here, or were those prior to?
They were prior to, right?
Yeah, they were prior, but my dad redone them before we moved in. But we had to have them additions on because we have a pretty large family.
Pretty large family.
And around the breakfast table, we had a table with benches, And I remember that quite well, and I enjoyed that very much.
And you had power up here at that time in the
Not at
forest?
that time.
No.
Not at that time.
So you didn't have-
It came later.
Came later.
Now,
Yeah.
Excuse me, guys.
go ahead. No.
I was just going to ask, so you heated by the fireplaces? Is that firm wood or coal or
Wood.
firm wood? Your
That's where
job.
the work come in.
Your job to cut the wood.
That was his job.
That was Ralph's job. Shirley remembers Ralph used to have to cut the wood on it. Did you ever do things like that? I know when I was growing up, raised on a farm, your job was to cut the wood. My job was to heat the bricks by the fireplace at night and then rub them on the bed before everybody went to bed to warm it
I don't know
up.
about that rubbing on the bed, but I've seen my sister, and we'd have somebody that visit, and they'd wrap a brick up in in some cloth,
Uh-huh.
keep them feet warm.
Keep them warm, yeah.
And it would do it too.
It's evidently the farm where I was raised in Mississippi, evidently they came from Georgia because the tradition must have moved west for them.
Well, we were just driving and I were talking about this house being air conditioned. It was cold in the winter and hot in the summer.
Do y'all remember having, you raised your own meat, hogs?
Oh, yeah.
things like that?
Oh, yeah.
Y'all remember butchering the hogs
Oh,
and
yes, sir.
smokehouse? Did you have a
Yes, sir.
smokehouse and stuff?
We had a smokehouse back on this side,
Back on that side over there?
and always at least 2 hogs hanging, you know, and we'd cut it up and sugar cure it. That's the breakfasts I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know. I was talking to someone, it sounded like it was very historical terms the other day, and I was telling them about being raised on a farm. Maybe you can have, I don't remember baths. The only thing I remember is the black cauldron, boiling the water out back and being dunked in it. Y'all remember anything like that?
That's about right.
Yeah, yeah, that was hard. You had to pick that pig up, and that was, you had to really strain to get that one up, get him in the vat.
Well, would y'all like to, I know that, I don't know if you've been in the home for a while. Would you like to take a tour? And this is going to be the fun part for me, so you can hopefully conjure up good moments for you and good memories when you were young boys growing up, and maybe you can share some of those thoughts with us as we go through.
Well, I've got a lot of that hay moved out so we can walk
Well, that's
through
good,
there
Mr.
now.
Farmitter.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
That'd be fine.
All right, let's go inside.
Let's go inside.
Well, gentlemen, we're inside now. Sherlin, what was this room used for when you were growing up?
This was a bedroom. There's two rooms, this room and one this side on the other side of the hall was for bedrooms.
Whose bedroom was this?
Well, I slept in it for several years.
Good. Billy, we have some, I know we have some exposed logs in here. During the break, we were talking about the floor. How about telling us a little about it?
Yeah, well, I was asking Sherlin about the floor, and Sherlin, Ralph, and Herman, and they remember themselves putting down the flooring over it, and we were talking about that that would date that part of it, and probably underneath it there's a wider plank floor, and hopefully when we find that, that's the one that will go back originally. But it was very interesting talking about the guys. They said they grew up to be good carpenters living out here. I'm sure they did too. Asked the guys also, and they don't remember. Evidently, when they moved in, their family had an all sheetrock, and in the years in the 40s, this was a big, beautiful home compared to most in Georgia. Guy had an interesting statistic. Guy, what was the number of homes that you were talking about?
Talking about in 1940, there were approximately 6,000 homes in Bartow County, and in 1990, there was only 1,500 of those homes left, so a lot of them are gone.
And this one probably would rank with being one of the most fortunate over the years that this home, the fireplaces are still intact. There's been very little vandalism whatsoever. I think people have respected it because they realized what it was. The logs, as you can see, we've measured some that are a little bit 16 inches over. They run all the way up to a little bit over 18. And we haven't been behind them yet, but probably what we're looking at here is these logs were taken out of one solid log, split in the center, and then about 4 to 5 inches from the other side, from the outside edge of the log, it was hand hewn again. So what you would end up with is 2 logs out of one rough log. And the settlers back then, they had an interesting way to do it, believe it or not. It wasn't random, it wasn't helter-skelter. There was a lot of thought process went into it, very artistic. No, I've never seen 2 cabins that are ever identical. Probably, and it'll be interesting, like I say, we'll find this log here, the twin to this log, probably on that side of the wall opposite it. They usually faced it, and that was the way that they really upscaled or upgraded their home. They would take a log on this side of the room if it was hand-hewn, and the twin of it would be on the other side, so when it was built, this wall looked identical to this log. The log height, the log width, everything about it. And they really were, the books that I've read and the works that I've seen, they took their time on it. It wasn't something like that you would think, well, we need to get in here before the snow falls and this kind of stuff. No, they would live in a little bit more humble manner so that when they moved their family and had their family, the gentlemen were well prepared. They had taken their time they planned to be there for many, many years. And you can tell, this is heart pine. The thing that's very unique about cabins, most of the cabins, they're different, varying by state, whether it's Virginia, Tennessee, Alabama, some I've seen in Mississippi and Georgia. Most of them are done out of chestnut or just another variation of oak. This one is heart pine. The timber was probably cut off this site right that we're on right now. It is, you can see there's a couple little, you can see powder post beetles in here. That's normal. Almost any house will have that. But from what we've seen, the inspection, there's no termite damage, nothing. It's just almost insect-free. And that's Mother Nature protecting us. That hard time will do that. So that was kind of a quick synopsis of it, guys.
Well, these are some awful big logs. You don't see pine trees this size now.
No, that's what they call first growth. The things that you see now are replicated, and there are many variations of it. These trees probably would stand 80 to 90 feet, 60 to 80 feet high, and they'd run the same width from the bottom to the top. Beautiful building logs. I don't know whether the camera's going to be able to see it, but we've taken some of the drywall off so that you'll be able to see up in the attic up there. But these timbers, you've heard of 2.4s. Well, these things are true 4.6s. The ceiling rafters and joists up there, they're quarter. Most of those that we've seen up there they've taken pine or cedar. That we don't know yet, the species of the wood, but they've taken it, called quarter sawn it. They've sawn it in half, completely in two, then they turn that again and sawn it again. And they've taken the flat side and run it down so that the lats, or the roof, where the roof sits on it, is always on a flat. And if y'all can get a picture sometime on this thing, we will, when it's going up there, you'll see the rounded edge, the rounded quarter, and all the little knots that are still on that thing. And the wood, even after 120 years up there, this might be the first one I've ever seen that dry, the wood that hard. It's a remarkable piece of property. It really, really is. Any other questions from a layman?
Now, I know when we first looked at this cabin, we were curious because there didn't appear to be a loft. And if you're going to go to all this trouble to build a log cabin, a lot of times they have a loft for sleeping quarters and so forth. And these are real high walls, what, 15, 16 feet?
That's right.
And we didn't see any sign of that. Now,
at first, I remember when you and I were talking, I came out to look at it, and I was scratching my head because I said, this doesn't look like most log cabins that I've seen. What at first I thought it was a barn that had been converted, a barn converted into a house. And I said, well, I've seen barns with dog trots, but then the more I got to look at it, I said, no, it wasn't built in that rough, crude, outdoor type fashion. It was built more finished. So it left me to believe that this was just like 4 guys showed up for work today, and we had a bunch of logs out there, and we said, okay, what can we do to make this one a little bit different? And what does the homeowner want, like a building company? And they said, well, I want that room over here, and I want that log like that. And that's what they did. They took their hewing axes out and went after it, and they ended up with what I hope we'll find, what we think is one of the most unique log cabins that the majority of us have ever seen.
Now, there's no chinking in here. We don't see any, but we do see paper that has been apparently glued or somehow set over these logs.
That was that seemed to be one of the popular things back, especially with log cabins that you'll go and find. This one has been dressed and cleaned, but as you get into here, what we were talking about a while ago, it's going to be interesting because somewhere in here, this was an insulation factory. They would take paper, be it newsprint or just paper or whatever, and they would take it and glue it. And the gluing kind of sealed it, just like your plastic does insulation. Takes care of all the cracks, and they just use flour, water, and paper. Stuck it on like paper mache, and it stays for many, many years when you do that on it. They were never chinked as far as we can tell. The little amount we pulled off, it wasn't chinked. They were probably, when it was built, they were sided. They just came in right over this with, on the outside, not the inside. This was probably open the whole time, but on the outside coming in, they just took a 1x10 or a 1x12 or whatever, flat piece of lumber, ran it and nailed it right over the crack here, and that's the way it was. That was their finish from the outside on it. We've seen some of that in places outside. Our plans for it are to go back. The integrity of it will remain intact. The consensus of the 20 people panel committee that we convened, Mr. Vaughn, and all of us were there, wanted it chinked again, and that's exactly what we'll go back and do. So everything, the cracks that you see now will be chinked in that period type chinking.
Now, Mr. Vaughn, weren't you mentioning that possibly this wall board was put on after y'all moved in?
Well, it was right prior to us moving in. Before, when my father bought it, prior to moving in, they came in and did the sheetrock, and that was right before we moved in. Now, I don't know what was there, if anything was there they had before or not, but they sheetrocked prior to us moving in back in sometime in the 40s, prior to 45.
Right. And other changes, y'all had done the floor?
We did the floor and did some work outside and some more work back in the addition that had been put on.
Right.
Some additional sheetrock and all. That's primarily it. When we moved here, there wasn't any electricity, so later, of course, electricity was available. Of course, we had power into the house.
Let's move into the dog trot if we can and see this 1x12 siding that's been put in here and tell us about that.
Okay.
All right, we got these 1x12 boards covering up the logs in here. Were those here when you were?
They are original, right? They were here when we moved in.
Billy, when do you think those were put in?
God, it's hard to tell. They look like they're plain logs, so they don't look rough sawn from here, but it's all painted over. Our plans for this is to go back, and you can see they're painted, the paint's painted. We'll finish off the paint to make sure it's not falling, and then basically just reverse the boards. Where on the back side, they're true sawmill boards there, which will give you back the natural effect. So that's part of the saving and the restoration process. It very well could have been painted 1870. We don't know.
No, it was painted after we moved in. I remember painting. So when we moved in, it was just plain boards. So I think my mother wanted it painted, so somebody
got painted.
Yeah.
When Mama said painted, it got painted.
Okay, when we talk about a dog trot, this was not here, right? Or was here?
Well, looking at it, Guy, you can see that the hole in the drywall, that certainly wasn't there. I don't know. It's just, that's horizontal. Yeah, horizontal run boards, about 110s or 112s.
So this was probably open all the way down the middle and right out the back.
It could have been, but then again, they could have been closed too. A majority of the ones you're seeing today, very few of them go back and put logs in. Above this thing now, there's a top plate log. This thing is not, it doesn't set like two cabins. It's set up like this, and then they put a piece of drywall across it. Tying this building and this building, they're tied together with logs. It's called a plate log, and it goes from that end of the building all the way to that end of the building. That's the top plate log that ties the whole structure together, and it's pegged right here. It's split in the middle and pegged. They've got one on this side and one on this side, so the whole building is tied this way and also tied this way.
You can see the kind of the bottom of it, right?
Can you?
Under here, going across.
And that's the heavy log.
Right, that's the heavy one. So these, what was the basic purpose for these dog trots? I mean, we explained it to begin with, and I know we had a dog around here earlier, probably slept here, but I mean, this makes a lot of wind coming through here. I think it would just howl through here.
I've asked, every time I get a chance to see somebody at a log cabin, I've gotten multiple answers on it. I don't think there is any true answer. It was just a period of architecture that facilitated something to keep you out of the weather before you went in a house. I've seen, and they're still in it today, that they're extended families, and it was Mama, and they had a cabin over here, Mom and Daddy, and they had children. And the children, it was wonderful back then because they stayed at home and stayed on the farm. So what they did, they came across, built another cabin on the other side for their daughter or for their son when they had their family. One room here, one room over here. And they built this trot, and that's the way they tied them together. So, you had your own private living facilities for mother and father, or grandmother and granddaddy, or whoever who it was, and then you had one for another family. And that's one part. The other part was keeping the animals out of the actual snow, sleet, rain, or stuff like that. There's probably multiple uses. I wouldn't know, Guy, what the exact reason was.
We had did some research last year, especially over on Hall Station Road, in one of the old mansions there, the Oaks, built by Oliver Prince. It has, you got 2 stories on one side, 2 stories on the other, and a dog trot right down the middle. With big columns, but the house is pretty well gone now, and only one side exists, and it's falling down. But when you get the old photographs, you see that dog trot, and you read articles talking about that. Quite interesting.
I've heard of, I've seen one that it was unique, and it was a dog trot, but it wasn't a floored dog trot. it was strictly to the ground. The house, the living facilities there, and the barn was there, and the wagon and their transportation was right here. So when they came in, they just drove under, loaded their hay, got out of the wagon on that side, loaded the hay, got across the wagon, went in the house on that side, and that's where they lived. Carport back, and that probably the origination point. Back in those days, you got to remember, it wasn't going into, we didn't have and nothing was air conditioned, and there wasn't any central heating there. It was, you go in that building there in the middle of winter, like we've had in here last year in those snowstorms, it was below zero in there, and they're heating by logs, so it doesn't get real warm.
Mm-hmm. One of the stories, go back to this house on the Oaks, a lady from Rome wrote Miss Green wrote an article that we published in the Historical Society newsletter, and I believe one of the comments in there was the door to the dog trot in the old Oaks house stayed open, and said, but the day the goat came through and went into the house and made a mess of things, said Mama closed the door from then on.
Yeah.
That was it. So
the last thing you wanted to do back then was to have to be burdened with going outside. I'm sure if you had a farm, somebody had to milk the cows, and the closest proximity from a house to the barn, if you could do it outside your back door, was probably a godsend.
Yeah.
One other point to make on that thing, Guy, is that during this period of time, and 1810 or 1800 up to 1900, and probably even into the 20s, the people who lived off the land spent as much money on their barn as they spent on their house. They took care of what took care of them. They wanted to make sure that their animals, their feed grains or anything, their corn and whatever, stayed good. They would spend money out there and hold back on their homes. You can see examples of that all over this country.
That's right. Y'all got any interesting stories to tell that happened in this house?
Well, not that I can, think about now.
Or you want to share now?
Well, some of them we want to share, so no, not really. Just pretty normal family. Unless Leslie's got something, Herman.
My daddy, he always kept the best news that he could find, And at that time, I wasn't living here. I was living in Florida, and I come home one day, and he had a tractor. And I said, Dad, you're getting uptown, aren't you? You got your tractor. I'm sure you fellas heard that old song, you don't have to drive those mules anymore, there's a tractor in the barn. Well, I enjoyed that. My daddy had quite a sense of humor, You could talk to him on any subject. He was a hard-working man. I really, looking back, I appreciate the things that he did for me.
Harmon, this is probably a very, very nice gift that the family's doing for him, and that's one way to look at it, that the Baum name be preserved forever as long as there's a state park system in Georgia. Your name, honoring your family, your father, your mother will always be there, and that's a nice way to do it.
That sure is. Mm-hmm. It's going to work well. One of the things I know, we talked about the fireplaces earlier, what they burn? Wood, coal?
Wood. Burning wood, yeah. And cut the wood on this property.
Mm-hmm. And we talked when the house is moved and so forth, we're going to try to save some of these brick. And we talked about that off and on.
Got good news and bad news. Good news is we're going to save the brick. The bad news is we're going to save the brick.
We talked about the Baum family reunion coming to clean these bricks.
No, in that committee, the best minds that we could put together, I think, like Shirley, I keep saying 20, it was somewhere around that. And trying to get a consensus was not that hard, but to maintain the integrity of the property itself, the majority of people that we asked to come out and share that information with us felt like that it should be done back in the original form, and brick was the original. So for all it's worth, we'll clean every brick and relay every brick. Now that's probably, and this is a good place to put also at Cassville High School out, we've called, and the VOTEC department out there has kindly offered their assistance in laying the stone up for the stone foundation, footers like that. So, and also Georgia Power, to mention some volunteers now, it's probably a good time to put it in. some of our corporate people that we're friends with, and friends with the parks, and also friends with the Historical Society, such as Georgia Power is coming out with a boom truck to assist us in removing the logs, and hopefully before the project is completed, we would have had 20 or 25 corporate sponsors and employees of those corporations who just want to come out and volunteer their time. It's a wonderful experience. They can learn something maybe somewhere down the road they'd want to do one for themselves. You never know.
That sounds great. We're going to appreciate all that
This
participation.
parliamentar's going to work hard. He's sworn to me that he would work hard.
I've already got all this hay left to move out of here in this room next to us. But as we said like earlier, this room to our right is identical really to the room that we just moved out of. And it's kind of a mirror image, the doorways and the fireplace and so forth. And that was another bedroom?
Another bedroom, right.
Okay.
Some of the brothers use that bedroom.
You just don't find the bedrooms on the front of the house.
No, I don't know what the original intent was, but that was our usage on it. And on the addition, which would be back to that room, my mother and father had their bedroom and a little parlor, and the fireplace was in there.
Yeah.
In fact, behind that was a kitchen.
Back behind that was the kitchen. That's right.
Right, and it's okay. That was the parlor. It has its own fireplace.
Right.
Now that kitchen has a tremendous fireplace.
It has a huge. It has the rods over so you can put the big pots on it and suspend them. Cooking. We never did use it that way, but it was there to be used. So I think at one time it was used for that, to cook.
Right.
The difference in I would say a Georgia farmhouse or a southern farmhouse during that period of time, it was built for utilitarian purposes. You didn't have the parlor, and you didn't have the cut bullseye molding on your wood and stuff like that. It was there to keep you warm as possible in the winter, give you a place to sleep. You didn't have a big wardrobe. You can look around here. One thing that always is forgotten, interesting also, you will not find a closet in this room, in this whole house. You could probably put your finger on where your nail was, where your coveralls was, or no pair of overalls, because that's basically what you were dealing with at that time. And that's everything utilitarian. Everything a place, and a place for everything is what they said.
Now I know we had one more room, which was behind the room we were in, the first bedroom we were in. What was that room?
Well, it was just basically it's a small room for storage primarily. It's a very small room, and they use it for storage, and then eventually it turned into a bathroom later, much later.
Billy, the cabin's coming along now. We've done an awful lot. The last time we were together, we went through the cabin with Mr. Vaughn, looked at everything that we were going to do to describe the cabin and so forth. We've had a couple of real good days in the past weeks where you started work on that cabin, and I know the first day you did a lot of demolition as far as the outside siding and the wallboard on the inside. How about telling us about that?
Well, we had a timeline. We had talked about a timeline, Guy, about we hoped we could do it all in 45 days and have the lot cleared. And we made the first couple of weeks. We were right on target. In fact, we were a little bit ahead on target. We didn't hit any unexpected situations in the construction. It's basically what we thought it was going to be, which was good. We incurred a little bit of log damage, nothing that would certainly impede the project, and we moved pretty swiftly through it. I think the guys can, if you can't hear it, you can see it. The boom trucks are out taking the cabin down now, and hopefully by this afternoon we'll be completely disassembled. Like you said, it was full of hay. We started with hay, and then we went through the roofing, and then we went through the tin roof, and then the rafters, and on and on and on. And this is the last phase here.
Right. I know, it's quite interesting. Did you find anything out of the ordinary?
I think on one of the pieces that we did on the shows, we said you never know what's behind the walls, and I'm sad to say at this state, this point of the game, we didn't find anything. Of course, we weren't expecting it, but we did find a couple of metal pieces that represented some of the farm work back in the early 1900s. We haven't found any dating on the cabin, so that hadn't helped us as of yet.
Right. I know we did find a lot of newspaper under that wallboard, for insulation, I assume.
Well, it sufficed what you could say the farmers enjoyed at that time. They had some real nice wallpaper. Most of it looked like we were able to read some of the things. It was 4 or 5 days before Pearl Harbor was bombed back in '41.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of looked like they quit wallpapering around 1943 or 44 and put up drywall then. But we had a lot of fun reading the papers at the same time.
Okay, on day 2, I noticed we pulled off the additional structures to the original cabin, all the additions. I know that went real well and fast, and got everything pretty much cleared off.
Got everything back down to the logs. I think if I'm not mistaken, after the 4th day, we were completely cleared on the logs and we were ready to start on the roof.
Now, did you find a lot of rot?
The seal plates, the front seal plates are okay. We might go ahead and replace those. The back seals were gone, and then there was a couple of examples. Well, they're not active, but there was some termite infestation.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, it really wasn't caused by the heart pine timber that the logs were sawn from. It was really caused from the addition of the plywood, the new invention, so-called, of the 1940s and 50s, that the termites were just attracted to. Little damage to the logs, though.
Right. How about the brick? I know we were going to try to save as many as possible and put 2 brick chimneys back on the cabin.
All of our hands are pretty well blistered and somewhat gnarled by the brick, but we spent about 2 days, a crew of anywhere from 8 to 10 people, nothing but taking down bricks and cleaning them. And we ended up hopefully with enough to go back with what and the original look on it. If we're short, we'll come back and we can find that, we can match that brick. So we're in good shape on the brick.
That's right. Flooring, we decided to discard, right? And put a new floor in it when we
the flooring,
rebuild it.
We were anticipating maybe that the big wide plank flooring was in good shape underneath it, but that was really the reasoning. It wasn't a modernization when they put the second floor down. It was a necessity because the original floor was in very, very bad condition.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Couldn't save it.
Couldn't save it. Well, that's a shame. I had the opportunity to travel up to New Etowah and see a log cabin that had been restored. And
so you went up there and saw Mr. Mewborn?
I did, and it was a good trip. And let's take a look at it.
Good.
I'm here at New Etowah Historic Site near Calhoun, and I'm visiting with Frankie Mewborn, Superintendent of the park. Oh, Frankie, good to see you.
Good to see you. Glad to have you.
You've kind of been involved with our project back in Cartersville with the log cabin. You've seen it and so forth, and thought it might be a good idea to bring the cameras and see what the finished product looked like. What does a cabin look like completed? Some of the different styles of architecture involving log structures, and also what are some of the other farm buildings? I notice you have a lot of farm buildings here.
Yes, we do.
Involved with the project here. First, though, I'd like to ask you, what is New Etowah for those who don't know?
Okay, New Etowah was the Cherokee Nation capital from 1825 up until the forced removal in 1838. And of course, forced removal is the Trail of Tears, and New Etowah was the area where the treaty was signed in 1835 that sealed the fate of the Cherokee. So it's a very significant site, not only that it was the Cherokee Nation capital, but the fact that the treaty was signed here. And of course, there were 12,000 people that were involved in the removal, and then according to the records that are available, there was anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 people that actually perished on that trail. So New Etowah was retained to tell the story about the Cherokees, about their lifestyle. Also, of course, it's a very sad part of our history, but that's important to tell too, that hopefully that type of thing will never happen again. So the site here, we have buildings that reflect the Cherokee lifestyles. We have buildings that they're public buildings like the Supreme Court building and also the print shop. Those are models of what the original buildings looked like. We have an original mission station that was here. It was built in 1827. Samuel Worcester was the missionary that lived here. And then, like the buildings behind us that we're going to be talking about earlier, these are these are showing how the Cherokees lived during this time period, during the 1830s time period. And then, of course, we have a museum here that tells the story of the Cherokee and about their government that was set up here and about the Trail of Tears.
Right. Well, it's a outstanding park, and I invite anybody to come see it.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
The log structures that we have behind us, as I understand it, the Cherokees would have lived in structures like this in the earlier years, just as the white settlers did when they started moving into Bartow County and or Cass County at the time in the 1830s, 1840s, 50s, and so on. About what time did the log cabins start appearing on the scene here in this area of the state?
Actually, by the mid to late 1700s, the log cabin had pretty much taken place of what we call a wattle and daub type buildings. Now, a lot of people have the stereotype of Indian, and they automatically put them in teepees. And of course, by this time period, that was, as we said earlier, this was the log cabins had came into place. But prior to the introduction of the log cabin, it was wattle and daub, which is basically made out of sticks and mud. They would place sticks maybe a foot apart and make either a circle or a square, and then weave smaller sticks in between that, and then pack mud on the outside and on the inside of that, and then they'd have a bark roof. So that is pretty good structure. But of course, when these were introduced, this was much sturdier, and it was easy to build. Materials were readily available, and these pretty much took hold by, I'd say, about 1775, 76, something like that.
It's interesting. Did the architecture change a lot from those days on a log cabin? All fairly the same?
About the same. I mean, you could say a log cabin is a log cabin, and right. You can go from 1700s on into 40 years later, and it'll be the same. Another 30 or 40 years, and they'll be the same. Even to this day, there's some techniques that are different.
Right.
And of course, there's machines that do it now, but from a distance, they all look the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I notice you have a lot of really nice structures here. Where did these structures come from?
Now, the front cabin here is it's an 1830 structure, and it was located about 8 miles from here, just south of here, and it was donated to the site in 1983. And of course, it was quite an extensive project to number all of the logs. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle, and you have to track everything and then take it apart and bring it here and then reconstruct. So it's just like a big Lincoln log set, basically, is what it is. If you've ever played with those, you know how these things are put together.
Sure, and I understand you're going to get the opportunity to do our cabin too, aren't you?
We'll get to try our hand at it again. And then the buildings to the rear of this front cabin here, of course, are the outbuildings, corn crib, smokehouse, and then there's a barn here. Now those were donated, or we bought those, all three of them, for about $1,800. It was a real good buy. We got those out of Bradley County, Tennessee, up in the Bucks Pocket area, for those people who know that area. And same process. Went up and took the roofs off. Of course, everything was numbered first, and then we started dismantling. And then on trucks, we just brought them in here. We treated the logs, and then had to, of course, cut some replacement logs. Some of them, you know, these buildings are well over 100 years old, and of course, there's going to be some logs that are rotted, and you have to be able to hew them out and match them, and put it back together. That's the hard part. Actually, if you had a building intact, the hard part would be tagging it, taking it apart, putting it back together. Is really not that much trouble.
Now, what kind of wood are these structures typically made of in those 1800s?
Mostly it would be timbers that were readily available. More than anything else, it would have been heart pine. There were some that were made with oak, poplar. The oak, of course, would retain, was more sturdy and would last longer, but it was a lot harder to hew. Whereas the poplar and the heart pine was real easy, and pine mostly. We do have one cabin here that is chestnut. So,
is that right?
So that's an old building.
It sounds like it.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of preservative do you use to preserve these logs?
Well, actually, we've talked with Historic Preservation on what type of preservative to use, and they actually don't recommend anything. They say that as long as the roof is, the overhang is far enough, a couple of feet over, that those things will pretty much do all right. Now, there's new stuff that's coming out, and I'm sure as soon as they know, we'll know, and they'll let us know what to put on them.
Right, well, that's good. Well, let's move in a little closer and take a closer look at one of the buildings.
That sounds good. Sounds good.
Frankie, we're in front of what I understand to be the 1830s Lewis cabin. Is that correct? The main cabin. I'd like for the audience to see the workmanship. Here we have, as I understand, a dovetail joint.
That's correct.
Which looks to me an awful lot of work.
It is.
With a hatchet or an axe.
That's correct. Actually, this a full dovetail, of course, would come down and fan out on both sides. This is kind of blocked off, so you could actually refer to this as a half dovetail. And the reason they did this was because it locks in. It will not pull apart. Okay,
right.
And also the slope there prevents water from settling in the notch and causing it to rot out. So when you talk about craftsmanship, this is it at its finest.
You have that slope coming this way, and then another one coming here, and it is kind of a locking joint.
They would actually use axes and foot adze to hew these out by hand. Even the logs, these squared logs here, would be hewn out by hand with using the axes and froze and that sort of thing.
Right, now when I look at, or I used to play with those Lincoln logs, they overlapped. What did you call that? Is there a name for that?
There's a saddle notch that you can, and a V-shaped notch, and then this is a dovetail, or a lot of people refer to this as dovetail, but actually in actuality it's a half dovetail.
Now the common one you see today when people try to rebuild log cabins
Half
is
dovetail.
Half dovetail. Okay. Yeah, but I think that's a lot of work for the early settlers.
It is. Quite a bit of work.
Yeah, and we talk about the chimneys too, that I noticed you have rock. I know we had a big protest when we brought up the subject of using rock on our cabin in Bartow County.
Right.
Of course, we had a lot of clay in Bartow County, and brick were very common to the area.
Right.
Why did y'all go with rock? Because Gordon County would have a lot of clay also, would it not?
This particular building, when we found it, had a rock chimney.
All right.
So in order to stay along with the original construction of the building, you stick with what was there. And so rock was on this building, so they went back with a rock chimney here.
Now you mentioned they also made chimneys out of wood.
That's correct. That was real easy to make, and it sounds really funny. You know, going to build a fire in a wood fireplace. It doesn't sound like it would work at all. But actually, the wood is stacked up just like the buildings are with notched ends, and then they would pack mud on the inside and all the way up the smokestack. And then the mud becomes hard as a brick. So basically the wood is used as a framework to stick the mud to.
Right.
Real easy to make.
Right.
Real easy.
Now, one thing I want to clarify, this cabin itself was built by a white settler
That's
at
correct.
the time, right? Okay, not the Indians.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move inside and take a look.
Okay.
Thank you. We're inside the main cabin right now, and we're taking kind of an inventory of what an early settler had. But before we look at that, I'm interested in this chinking on the wall. There is no chinking. You've got strips across.
All right, that was common on the interiors of the house, is to put the wood stripping in there from the outside. Now the chinking is basically sticks that are pressed into the cracks, and then daubing is the mud that comes across the top. Now from the inside they may have stripped it like what we have in this building here, and it really wasn't even uncommon on the interior of a cabin even to panel, to put wood paneling, and you just have a wood wall. You wouldn't even be able to see the logs. And in some instances they would whitewash the interior of the cabin, because of course the primary light source during that time was candles.
Right.
And if you've got an old gray colored building inside, it'd be hard to illuminate the interior. So whitewash, light your candle, and it would put out a pretty good amount of light for you.
I notice you don't have a lot of privacy here.
No, not at all. Actually, this cabin is really quite large compared to what most of the Cherokee lived in. Most of them lived in a cabin about half this size, which would be 14 by 16. Now, could you imagine an average family of about 6 people living in a 14 by 16 one-room cabin? The children slept in the loft. You can see the stairs or the ladder back here. Children up there, and the adults would have slept downstairs. Kitchen up front where the fireplace is, dining downstairs, bedroom for the adults, and then the children upstairs.
All right, and that would be typical for the settlers too. You
Yeah,
mentioned
yeah.
that, right?
This is no different. The Cherokee versus the settlers, all the same.
Right, now we had the two-room with the dog trot in the middle, which is a little, I don't know, one of the rooms maybe a little smaller than this one in particular, but there were two of them. And,
Okay. That was common during that time period too. You might want to refer to it as a dog trot or a two-pen cabin. It wouldn't have been unusual to even use the loft areas on both sides for people to sleep in. In some instances, they would cook in one side. They'd have a kitchen one side. That would be like a summer kitchen, and then the main house where everybody was staying would stay relatively cool during the summertime.
Right.
Okay, and they would cook in the other side.
Well, that's extremely interesting. I know some of the furniture you have here. Where did you get that?
All this furniture is typical of that time period, but it was bought, of course, years later in the antique shops and that sort of thing. But judging from the historical record and books that have been written on the time period, we tried to match the furniture with the time period. And some really neat types of furniture that we have here for people to come and see.
Well, it's quite interesting. I know especially the fireplace, and I don't know what our plans are going to be as far as the cook pot and the stove and so forth, but it's interesting the way they did cook at the time. And I know one of the things that Billy Hanson had said early in Cartersville, we were looking at one of the cabins, is the fact that a lot of times that the money and the time and the energy went into these outbuildings, such as the barns and so forth. And yours are very unique. Instead of the cabin, because that's where the money was to be made, or that's where the livelihood of the food was made. So that's extremely interesting to me. Well, I appreciate your time today, Frankie.
Okay, yeah, we're glad
Thanks
you
a
came
lot.
out.
And hope to come back up here sometime.
Sounds good.
Thanks. Really, we're out here today moving the logs finally. Said this is a great time for this cabin, and finally get it off the site, get it up at Red Top, and hopefully put it back in the spring.
Absolutely, and this is kind of the day we were on like we said, December the 15th, we hope to have been moved, and I think today is the 17th of December. And you can see that it's going real well. Georgia Power, Atlanta Gas Light, the guys are out, and we should be down and cleared by this afternoon. We expected it to take a day, and we think that's what it will do.
I noticed I had to do a little drilling on some of those top logs. What'd you find?
A little bit tough up there. Those old hard pine pegs were, the big sledgehammers wouldn't do it, so we had to drill the top pegs out up there before we could start on that. But it took us a little bit longer, about 30 extra minutes there, but we're pretty much on target now.
Right. Now you're going to take the logs, you're going to put them in a warehouse. Do you need to treat them or do anything to preserve them?
As soon as they leave here on the trucks, they'll be taken out to the park out of Red Top, and from there, we got racks out there where they're ready to go right on them. We'll cover them for the spring, and then in the spring, hopefully in March, we'll start coming out with it going up.
Good. Now, as far as go back on those pegs, do you find them on every course of logs, or are you just in the top?
It varies, all depend on who the builders were. The majority of them were never pegged or nail spiked on the corners. These were just your very typical. They were spiked on the corners, and the plate log was tied in the middle, a series of about 6 pegs, and after that, it's pretty much clear.
Right. Well, I know it's an exciting time, an exciting day to get this finally done and get it moved. And Department of Natural Resources, yourself, you've done a great job on this project.
Thank you.
And
on behalf of the guys, we have really, really enjoyed the opportunity, and again, express our thanks to the Etowah Valley Historical Society for letting us be a small part of it.
Well, we're looking forward to being with you again in the spring and start the construction process.
Good.
And I know our members are ready. Some of them are ready and willing to donate items of furniture and so forth for the inside of the cabin, so we're ready to get going on this.
I don't know if we said anything about it or not, Guy, but just for the film, if they can look, they might see the small plates on the logs where Mr. Frankie Mewborn and Jeff Stansel from New Etowah came down, spent the day, numbered the whole cabin, drew the legends up for us so that we can be accurate in detailing and putting the logs back when we come up with it in the spring.
Well, that's great. Well,
It's kind of an engineering feat in itself.
well, we'll be with you in the spring for sure, and we'll see you next time on Crossroads.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of Crossroads. We would like to hear your comments, suggestions, and questions on this subject. Please write the Etowah Valley Historical Society at Post Office Box 1886, Cartersville, Georgia 30120.